Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be for you locally. I'd like to welcome you to the next in our ongoing webinar series for the International Leica Society. I'm your host, Brad Husick. I'm the current president of LHSA, the International Leica Society, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to another in the series of our webinars that have been very popular. Um, We've got a wonderful guest speaker today who I'll introduce in just a moment, but I'd like to say a few words of welcome as we get started. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's here. I want to thank you for being a member of LHSA. We really appreciate it and appreciate your time and energy. Um, for more than 50 years, the International Leica Society has been a meeting place for Leica enthusiasts and collectors. Our organization is not-for-profit, and our officers and directors are all volunteers. Because of support from members like you, we are able to put on these webinars and a whole bunch of other programs, including publish our acclaimed and double award-winning Viewfinder quarterly publication. We have our photographic education programs like this webinar series and our Ask the Expert series. And we host meetings in the springtime and the fall. We just had our fall meeting here in Seattle, and we're planning our spring shoot in May of 22 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And we hope that you'll be able to join us in person for that event. The spring shoot's always a lot of fun, and we really get hands-on and take photographs and talk about our photographs. So, your generosity makes it possible for us also to have our philanthropy fund, which allows us to do our annual sponsorship of our photography grant winner. And you can read all about our 2021 grant winner on the LHSA website this year. What can you do to help your organization? This is your organization. If you're one of our free members that's joining us today because you purchased a Leica camera, if you like what you see and you want more of it, please consider becoming a regular paid member. Membership costs less than a good UV filter, and we hope that it provides a lot more value than that. If you're in addition to our sponsors who help us, we need your help. Invite your friends. Invite your friends to join us. It's a great place to talk about photography, even if you're not a Leica collector or even a Leica shooter right now, and you're just interested in Leica photography. This is the place to do it and meet like-minded people. If you'd like to help support this program directly, there's a way for you to contribute right away on your cell phone. If you text to the number 44321, that's 44321. If you text the word "give to LHSA," GIVETO LHSA. I'll put this in the chat window as well. You can give any amount you choose, even $10 helps offset some of the costs that we have in putting on programs like this. So there's a lot of ways to interact with us. We have a brand new website as of October. If you haven't been there yet, please join us. Visit that website at lhsa.org. So much new information in a way that presented in a way that's really consumable, and really importantly, we have a new searchable database of perhaps the largest Leica collection of information in the world. So you can check that out as a member as well on our database, on the database on our website. So with that, I'd like to get today's program started by welcoming a dear friend of mine, Bill Royce. Bill, until recently, lived in the Seattle area along with a number of other LHSA members. He decided that sunshine was important to him and decided to move to Arizona, where he's living in a beautiful house, I think designed by his son, an architect. And Bill is a wonderful photographer, a board member of LHSA, a longtime supporter of LHSA. He's an Adobe certified instructor. And today he's going to talk to us about Adobe Lightroom primarily, and a little bit of Adobe Photoshop, and what are the new features that we're seeing that have come along recently in those programs, and we'll be able to take your questions towards the end. So please type into the chat window any question that you've got, and I'll keep an eye on those, and we'll try to keep enough time at the end to answer all of your questions. So with that, thank you and welcome, Bill Royce.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I think I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. What I'm going to focus on today is primarily the new feature which involves the masking function. And the masking function applies not only to Lightroom, but also to Adobe Camera, because they're both programs are very similar in how they work. And I'm going to do demos using both functions so that you understand exactly how that works. I think what the topics I'm going to cover range from what the new masking panel looks like and what the symbols mean. I'd like to define what a mask is because it's a rather commonly used term, but maybe a lot of people haven't really clarified as to what it really means for you as a photo editor. And talking about the overlays, the other selections that are available in the mask panel. And then I'm going to run through a summary of how the new tools work, the most powerful of which are the select subject and select sky. But I'm also going to do a little bit of review on how the brush linear gradient, radial gradient, and the color and luminance range function inside this new masking function. I'm going to talk about adding to the mask, subtracting or refining the mask, inverting the mask so that you can highlight one section of the picture and then switch to the other half of it or the other part of it. And then a little more of a complex subject, but a useful one potentially for many will be how to deal with intersecting masks. And in the process, you'll see how I'm going to show you that you can actually combine these new masks that you create with this new function with some of the old edits that you might have done under previous Lightroom versions or a previous version of Adobe Camera. So with that, I'd like to get started. And I'm going to show you, let me first kind of clean up the screen so I use more room here. And I'm going to start with a very fairly simple image. I took it a number of years ago in Morocco, and the reason I want to use this image is because it has quite a bit of blue in it, and the blue of the wall is similar to the blue of the sky. So how do we get started with masking? Well, I'll go to the develop module, which is sort of a natural thing to do. And then instead of the old toolbar that we had before in Lightroom, what we're seeing here is the crop overlay, which is the same. This is the spot removal, which you can access using the shortcut Q. Then there's the red eye correction, and also here is the new masking function. Now I can reach the masking function by clicking on the mask button, and it gives me a list of items that I can mask or that I can create a mask. Now, to understand what the mask really means, you have to simply say to yourself, what you're doing is defining an area in the picture that the sliders that you're going to see are going to affect. And that's fundamentally, you're masking off a part of the picture so that you can control selected parts of the picture. So in this case, I'm going to show you how to use the select a sky function. So I've picked the masking button, and I'm going to select the sky. And this is a fairly easy one to do because the sky is quite well defined. But this is a function that is mechanized by artificial intelligence, or what a lot of people use the term machine learning. So it looks at the image, and it's basically learned how to look at images from being trained on literally thousands and tens and thousands of images. And it actually did a pretty decent job of selecting the sky. Now, if you're familiar with Photoshop, if I go over and you see where the sky is actually showing in red now, that's because the overlay is showing as a red overlay. I can actually pick any color I want to use that as an overlay if the red interferes with some color in the image itself. It's just to show you simply where in the image the mask has been created. Other things that are here worthy of looking at when we control what the overlay does is an opacity control, and you can show the affected area or the unaffected area. And typically, I think it might be a little too confusing to deal with the unaffected area, at least for me. And then we have some solid colors we can pick, but you can actually decide to pick whatever colors you want for the overlay. So in this case, we'll just stick with the red overlay for now. I'll point out also there are types of overlays. I'm showing you the color overlay, which is the default. But if we go to a white on black, for example, if you're familiar with Photoshop, the white area in a mask is the area that's going to be edited, and the black area is the area that is not going to be edited, or it's blocked. It's blocking the edits. And then gray area is a gradual transition from being edited to no edits at all, depending on how dark the gray is. So right here, what we see is I can actually now with this mask show change by adjusting the exposure slider. And notice as soon as I start moving any of these sliders, the mask disappears and you actually get to see the effect. So in previous versions of Lightroom, I would have to work a lot harder to figure out how to modify the sky. Okay, so if I want to take advantage of the fact that the sky's masked off, what about the rest of the picture? Well, if I decide to modify the rest of the picture, I can just right click on mask. Oops, sorry, I have to go down here. Right click on the sky line here and invert the mask. And now what I am doing is affecting the edits. The edits that are here will affect everything in the image except the sky. So if I move the exposure control, you notice the sky pretty much stays the same, and the exposure control controls the rest of the image. And that same is for shadows and texture, clarity, the hue. I can actually pick a color and do all sorts of crazy things with it. So that's basically the very basics of how this works. If I want to control each one, then I can, now that I've inverted the this mask, this is the now the foreground, and I can actually rename these masks. And if I want to bring the sky back, actually I should rename this also. You don't have to rename them, but it's a nice feature to have. If I go in and now invert again or remove the reinversion, now I'm back editing the sky. I can excuse me. Let me go back up again here. So what I really want to do in my habit patterns are a little shaky. So what I want to do is copy the, well, let's just change this to sky because I did. And then if I adjust the sky, and then let's delete this one here. I'm going to delete this one. So now we're adjusting the sky. If I then duplicate sky, I can rename it as the foreground and invert the adjustment. And so now basically what I have is an ability to adjust the sky. And if I switch to the foreground, I can adjust the foreground. And so now I have complete control over this picture when I do that. So what I showed you is basically, and I apologize for getting a little bit out of step here, but you create a mask, let's say the sky, and then you duplicate it, and then you invert the edits, and all of a sudden you're editing the rest of the picture besides the sky. So, and then if I want to delete all of these masks, I can just right click and delete all the masks. We're back to 0. Those edits are going to stay with the picture if you just close the picture and start with another. And if you're using Adobe Camera Raw, those edits will stay with the Adobe Camera Raw function, assuming you don't flatten the image. So let me go to another picture to demonstrate. I'll do a better job here of demonstrating how to invert the mask. So let me go to the edit mode, and I'm going to show you a picture that I took with the SL2, and of 2 woodpeckers sitting on a tree, and I cropped the hell out of it, as you can see. This is the crop function where I just picked the center part of the image. And now the camera, because I didn't use exposure compensation, just basically exposed it for the sky, and the birds are pretty well underexposed. So the traditional way I'd handle this is probably try to brighten up the shadows and use a brush to bring the light values up on the birds. But in this case, I'm going to use masking. Now, I told you we could press this masking button, but I can also, in both ACR and in Lightroom, I can just press the M key and I get a create new mask prompt. So if I click on the plus sign, I'm going to try select subject. I could try select sky, but I'm going to try select subject just to compare how well it works with the two methods. Okay, so since I have this in the black and white mode, and the white is the area where we're going to edit, if I start messing with the exposure, you can see the birds are actually being affected by the edit, but not the sky, because I selected the birds, and the branches actually ended up becoming included with the selection. So there are a few problems that you might be able to see with the mask spilling over. And if I want to add to the mask, I can use a brush, and I'm using the scroll button to scroll, and then I can erase a little bit of that gray area in that bird, and then I can hold down the Alt key and subtract from the mask because it's spilled over. And so basically what we see is here we can make adjustments to the mask if you want to use the brush to either add or subtract. So that's one way to do it. And now if I go back to the mask function again, notice that mask one is here. The subject is here, and the brush modifications I made are right here. So let me explain a little bit of the symbology so that we can move on. The mask, this mask one, which I will rename now by double clicking and call that the birds, has some subcomponents in it, which are the actual controls over what the mask is showing. So if I click on those buttons right there, I can invert it, I can intersect it, I can duplicate that mask, or I can hide it or delete it. The brush, same actual controls there. Now I can hide by clicking on the eyeball, which is the same function that you see in Photoshop, and same with subject. So these two are actually make up the and modify the birds here. So in order to make this work and be able to control now the intensity of the sky, if I simply go over here and duplicate birds, now it says birds copy, and the original birds is here. I'm going to change the name of this to sky. And to make it work as a sky, I've got to invert the edits. And in this case, I'm going to invert that also. And so now, if I start messing with the exposure, as you can see, I'm affecting the sky. Let's see. Oh, sorry, we got to go up here. Now, I want to start this image over again, and this time pick the sky first. And so if I go to, excuse me, go to the sub menu, I can go to delete all masks. Now we're back to where we started, and I'm going to select sky. And I think from a machine learning point of view, sky selection seems to be on this image, seems to produce a better result. So if I name this the sky, rename it sky, and then I duplicate it and rename this the double click on it, birds, and then invert the sky. What we now have is the birds are going to be edited with this mask, and the sky will be edited with that mask. So if I go back to the birds again and start playing with the sliders, severely backlit, I'm going to raise the exposure, raise the shadows, maybe add a little texture and clarity, and maybe some saturation. And lo and behold, without a whole lot of brush work and skill, I've created a pretty decent image out of what really looked like a disaster. Now, if I go back to the sky, I can then add a little, maybe darken the sky a little bit to make the birds stand out, or I can really change the color of the sky here. I can make it a dark blue. And so I think maybe if you've got experience editing, you'd appreciate how little work I went through to make this into a pretty decent image. And this image, because of the quality of the lens that I used, and also the sensor in the SL2 with IBIS, could be enlarged substantially, and it's only maybe a fourth of the original area of the image. So,
Bill, do you have
yeah,
time for a question?
yeah, go ahead.
Um, that was great. I love the automatic AI-driven selection of the sky
Yeah,
or the birds. Photoshop has a number of really sophisticated tools for modifying a selection
right.
by growing it or shrinking it, by feathering the selection. Are any of those available in Lightroom?
Uh, not that I'm aware of in Lightroom. It would be like using I'm trying to remember the name of it in Photoshop.
Select and mask.
Well, I know, but within select and mask, there's a way to make it a little bit more refined
Right.
by brushing against it. And I haven't seen that in Lightroom or
Okay.
in Adobe Camera.
Second question is,
Yeah,
now that you've got the sky selected, I
right.
read somewhere that Adobe was adding replace sky somewhere.
Uh, Sky replacement function is not in Lightroom, it's in Photoshop.
Got it.
And so right now, and that's an AI driven tool that you reach in the edit menu in Photoshop.
Thank you.
So, um, so what I showed you is two different ways to get to the uh, picture you want by either selecting the sky first or selecting the subject first. And sometimes you'd have to try both methods in order to see which one works the best. Sometimes if you select the subject first and then you invert and look at the sky, you get some haloing. And so it's a matter of the individual image itself, whether it works or not. So let me move on to a different image here. What about night sky? Well, here's a picture from Mexico that I took with a CL, believe it or not, a 1/10 of a second. It's a little fuzzy, but actually a pretty usable image. If I press the M key, M for Mike, it actually goes into the develop mode and create new mask suddenly comes up. And I press the plus button and try selecting the sky. And I'm in the white on black mode, and notice it did a pretty decent job, but it spilled over a little bit into the buildings. So if I wanted to clean it up, I would go to use the brush and maybe brush out some of those areas pretty quickly. Just as an example of how you can clean up the image. And then if I want to change the exposure on the sky, I can just start cranking the exposure up. And in this case, I probably would want to do a bit of noise control too, because it's a very badly underexposed area in the sky. So it works with night skies. And it's a matter of playing with it to get the best results. What about selecting? I showed you selecting multiple subjects. Here's another one. You'll ask, how well does it do on monochrome images? Well, I'll show you. We'll do a street shot that I took this last summer. And I'm going to go to the select subject mode. And this is a pretty complicated image. And it doesn't do a perfect job, but comes pretty close. I can move this mask panel out of the way. And by the way, I can park it or dock it in the menu panels in Lightroom if you want to do that. Or if you have room on your desktop, you can move it completely out of the window and use it. So if I go back to now the different views and go to just the color overlay, I can see where I need to work on this image. I've got spillover and I've got under masking to do. So I'm going to add some mask area with the brush, and I'll add it in here. And her hair, it's going to be approximate. It skipped quite a bit of this guy's pants, but you notice if I'm using the brush and I use auto mask, it'll actually make the process a little bit easier and with the edges and so on. His shoe. Anyway, you get the idea. Now, if I want to subtract some part of the mask, I have to tell it what tool I like, and then I'll subtract the areas that appear to be over masked. Let's see, that's fairly clean, not perfect. If I go back to, you notice when I use the subtract tool, brush 2 has a little minus sign on it. That means that I had to use, I used a subtract in here. If I go back to brush 1, I can maybe add a little bit more right there. Okay, so now done. I've masked them off. Now I could, if I'm done with the subjects and want to treat just the background, I can then go to mask 1 and simply on the subject line invert. And by the way, because these are adds and subtracts, I have to go in here and convert this one to add and convert this one to subtract. And now they're approximately, it's approximately an inversion. Not perfect. I got areas that still need a little bit of work. So um, that's what you can do. I could have duplicated the mask and also worked it that way. But in this case, now that I've created the mask, I just go down to the controls, and here's the problem with this panel being here. I lose, these things drop off the bottom of the screen. Now I can control the background, and I can put in negative texture and negative clarity and negative sharpness, and emphasize the subjects rather than the background. So that's it really enables you to do some pretty quick and dirty um, image edits, especially if you don't want to get too fancy with the editing. This is a good example of how unbelievably labor saving these select subject and select sky functions are when you're doing editing. I can stop for a few more questions if we would like, and
Bill,
then we'll
yeah.
continue. Yeah.
Um, is it possible at the mask one level to duplicate at that level and invert?
Uh, you have to duplicate it, but then the inversion happens on the
Oh, you have to go
component.
inside.
That's right. Exactly.
You have to invert one by one
Right. Exactly.
the
Yeah.
contents of that.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
All
Yep.
right.
But notice that I also had to switch these because they were add and subtract in order to invert, complete the inversion.
Yeah. Seems
So
like that's something that Adobe might consider fixing in the future.
yeah, that seems a bit strange. You should be able to invert the whole darn thing, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to work. Okay, um, let's see if I come up with, let's do a done. And let's go to another example. Uh, a challenging, a rather challenging sky selection. This is a black cap night heron that I shot with the 50mm lens. So I was real close to this guy. And you'll see that there's a kind of a fuzzy line between the water and the sky because it's a typical smoggy LA day in Venice. And I'm going to go to develop, and I'm going to try to select the sky and see what happens. Pretty good, I would say.
Not
If
bad.
I'm actually kind of quite amazed. It's not perfect. And if I want to subtract from the mask, I just do subtract, pick a brush, and notice I'm changing the size of the brush with the scroll wheel. And
The
I
keyboard
just,
shortcut, by the way, for that is the square brackets, the square left and right brackets. Make your brush larger and smaller.
yeah, that's right. That's for, uh, that works. I guess it works on Windows as well.
Yes.
So, but it turns out the new version of Adobe Camera Raw, the scroll wheel actually now works to change the size of the
Yay.
brush, which is a good deal. Okay, so then if I go, if I put this, I can now shrink this mask panel down so it's not so much in view. And I can change the exposure of the sky that way. Okay, now if I, let's expand the uh, image or the mask panel, and I duplicate the mask, and now we're in the copy mode, and then we're going to rename this the foreground and water. And I'm going to go in there and I'll invert, and I have to change the brush to add. And now what we're doing is if I go back to the overlay, and by the way, if I want to show overlay, I type O for Windows and Y for Adobe Camera Raw. And very shortly, I'll do an Adobe Camera Raw demonstration to show you the equivalence. Okay, so now if I want to change the exposure of the foreground, I do that, or basically I want to cause the sky and the water to be distinct. I'll turn the overlay off. Now the sky and the water don't look quite the same in terms of tone. And then what I would like to do is create a new mask and select the subject. So, and it does a pretty decent job on animals, especially birds. I would say that's close enough. And then I'm going to raise the exposure of the bird and add some texture and clarity and make the bird look respectable. Maybe brighten up shadows a little bit. And so with almost no skill.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Bill, but maybe no effort.
Yeah. I have basically made this picture a heck of a lot better picture for the viewer. I still have the ability, if I go into masking and try a new mask, I still have the ability to just use the brush as a straight edit tool by creating a mask this way, except that I really should be using the color overlay. That makes it a lot easier to follow. So if I wanted to brighten up the wood, I just raise the exposure up. So you still have the ability to use these tools the way you're used to using them if you had used them before. So that's kind of the way it works. We can also create masks with the other tools, and I'll demonstrate that. And time-wise, I think we're doing pretty well here.
Yeah, we got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, good. All right, so let me try a different picture here. Selecting subject with a very complicated background. This is a picture of my son. I really didn't expect much from this picture. But if I go to the develop mode and select subject, bingo,
Wow.
almost perfect. And now if I open up this panel a little bit, and I'm not going to duplicate, I'm just going to invert, and I'm going to reduce the exposure and negative texture, clarity, and sharpness. And it's presto, it's artificial bokeh, if you want to use that term. And that took me, what, 15 seconds to do that. It does depend on how smart the subject selection algorithm is, but it's amazing how good this turned out compared to actually going in and manually selecting the subject or manually painting in the edits like we had to do before. Photoshop does have a more sophisticated selection tool, but it's beyond the scope of what I want to show today. Speaking of which, let me switch to Adobe Camera Raw and I'll pick an image here, and so we can. This is basically a picture in the local area with a bright sky and a dark um, foreground. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to uh, uh, I've created an Adobe Camera Raw filter, and it's the original image is a smart image. So if I double click on the Adobe Camera Raw filter, um, uh, if I move this out of the way, you can probably see this better.
By the
Let
way,
me,
if we could pause for 1 second, if that's confusing to people who aren't real Photoshop jockeys, what Bill is showing you now is the Adobe Camera Raw dialog box that you would see if you were opening a raw image for the first time in Photoshop.
right, exactly. Um, it, I've basically set this up to use Adobe Camera Raw as a filter, but if it's being used as the first window that opens up when you open a raw image, uh, fundamentally what you're going to see is almost all the same controls. But notice here, what I have are the controls, the similar controls that I talked about before are actually up here. This is the masking button, and this panel basically opens up, and I can select the sky, and pretty decent selection here. This is
Mm.
almost exactly what I would expect to want to do here. And then go back to the masking panel, and I can then duplicate the mask. Um, let's call mask 1 the sky. And in this case, when I double click, it just gives me an opportunity to rename it right there in the panel. So I'll call this the sky. What happened? I don't, it's whatever I accidentally punched here. And then the mask 1 copy, if I uh, invert this guy, the sky 1, uh, then the mask 1 copy you can rename as the foreground. Okay, so I don't think I need to add or subtract in either case. So in this case, I'll do I'll reselect the sky, and I think what I'm going to do is maybe add some little bit of saturation. You can see, and what typically works really well on skies is a little dehaze, but be careful that you don't create the cheap postcard look. And so the sky's looking pretty good, but the foreground basically sucks. So I'm going to go to the foreground mask, which I've all got set up here, and I'm going to raise the foreground and the shadows, and I think probably add a little bit of dehaze and texture and clarity. And bingo, that's basically how Adobe Camera Raw works. And it made pretty quick work out of this image. And so in this case, if I go OK here at the end, it goes back into Photoshop with the Camera Raw filter applied. And now with as you can see, the top layer is indicating that it's a smart layer. And I did that by going up to filter, convert for smart filters for the original image. And then I opened up the Camera Raw filter.
And the
So if I,
reason to do that is you can go back any number of times that you want to make adjustments, not just the first time you open the image.
that's right. So if I go back down to the layers panel and double click on Camera Raw filter, bingo, all the original adjustments are there. If I press the um, uh, uh, masking button, guess what? All the masks are still there and you can still play with them. So that's a really nice feature to take advantage of if you're messing with Adobe Camera Raw. I'm a big advocate of using Adobe Camera Raw to do routine um, tone and other adjustments. Nothing fancy, because it's so intuitive and fast and you're just using sliders instead of drop-down menus. Then once you get done with the Adobe Camera Raw, you can lay in any other kinds of layers and filters and whatever else. If I wanted to do another filter of this on this image, it would, if I go to filter and pick another filter like silver effects, for example, it would end up being another smart filter that could be re-edited. So I won't bother to do that at the moment. Let's see what other image I have here in Photoshop we can take a look at. Okay, this is another example where sky selection is an interesting prospect. So I'm just going to go to filter, convert to smart filters, and Photoshop reminds you that to enable re-editable smart filters, just the selected layer will be converted to a smart object. And then I'm going to, it's going to now be a smart object. And I'm going to select the Camera Raw filter. And by the way, the Camera Raw filter will open even non-raw images. So don't worry about I think the nomenclature is misleading.
Right. So it works on JPEGs, is what you're saying.
That's right. I want to just work on the sky because I think the foreground looks pretty decent. So I'm just going to go to the masking function and select the sky. And in the black and white mode, you can see the sky selection actually worked pretty well. If I wanted to spend the time, I could subtract, hit the subtract button and pick a brush and brush out some of that spillover. If I make a mistake, I can hit the Alt or Option key in the Mac and just peel back the mistake. So I'm subtracting. And if I screw up and do that, all I do is hit Alt or Option and change and erase my screw up.
And here you probably want your auto mask turned on, right, Bill?
That's exactly right. Let's see if we can find that button.
It's in the dark gray box when you scroll up. There you go. Inside the dark gray.
Oh yeah, there we are. Auto mask helps you with the edges for sure.
Yep.
Okay, so then if I go to now on mask 1, all the exposure controls and tone controls are there. And if you have any presets available, you can actually apply a preset. So I'm going to reduce the intensity of the light a little bit. I'm going to bring the highlights down. And I'm going to maybe warm it up just a tad and go to dehaze and clarity and texture. And now I have a fairly decent sky. Okay, so I'm going back to Lightroom after I finish this one. I'm going to cancel out of this because I basically have shown you what I need to show here. And let's see. Cancel. And drop out of, minimize that, and go back to Lightroom. And I want to do an intersecting mask is the last demo here to show you how that works. So let me pick another image that actually works with an intersecting mask. This one here is, let me develop this. So this rather bizarre inflatable sculpture is in Mexico City. And it's right across the street from the Carlos Slim Museum. So it's kind of an interesting subject, a little bit strange, I should say. So I'm going to do the mask, and I could select the sky, but I'm going to select the subject here and see how well it does. And the red overlay actually does a pretty good job with a couple minor things. I'm going to add with a brush. I'm going to add here and add here. And everything else kind of looks acceptable. And so now with the brush, with the mask the way it is, I can go through right click and go intersect mask. And I'm going to intersect it with a color range. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to tell Lightroom, and also Adobe Camera Raw works the same way, that I'm only going to change stuff within the mask that I'm showing you of the subject, and also that meets a criteria for a particular color. So notice my pointer is an eyedropper. So I hit the eyedropper, and now you see what happens is we start to change colors, and I can change the exposure of those colors. And notice only the color that I clicked on, which is the blue of her slipper, is actually being affected. I can actually change the hue, and I can actually pick a different color. It actually gets mixed with the underneath color to show you how that works. So it's a really interesting way to do that. I'll show you one more mask that I'll create a new mask, and this time I'm going to use a radial gradient, and I'm going to make that radial gradient around her head. And this works the same as a linear gradient. And now what I can do with this radial gradient is intersect with a color. So I'm going to intersect with that yellow. And now I can change just that yellow color. And notice her face pretty much stays the same. And the exposure of the hair. If you don't like that color, try that one. And also you can pick whatever mix of colors you want there. So I think, so fundamentally what the way intersection works is you're going to pick an area, a mask, and then within that mask, you're going to tell it to intersect with one of the other masks that are in the list that you can do.
It's like picking a subset, would you say?
Precisely. It's an overlap. You're only going to affect the overlapped areas between one mask and another. And that's how it works. It's fairly straightforward, and probably not one of the most useful masking functions, but certainly a good one to know.
Yeah, and if if you've got photographs, landscape photographs especially, where you're looking at a tree line against mountains or against a sky. How many hours have we spent, Bill, hand painting masks on tree lines?
That's right. Yeah. This function allows you to distinguish by color, uh, and also I should remind you that if you've got sky in the picture, you can always try selecting the sky first, because that seems to be maybe the easiest for this artificial intelligence function to pick out, um, and then you can go from there with the edits.
Right.
So, yep.
Excellent. Well, that was great, Bill. Thank you. Um, I'm going to encourage everybody, if you've got questions, whether or not it's about masking, um, if you've got questions about Lightroom or Photoshop, you've got an expert here with us. We did have a question that I'd like to address that came through email. And this came from one of our members, Dave. And Dave said, could you please talk about transitioning from older Lightroom versions to the subscription version of Lightroom and Lightroom Classic, and also the differences between Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Maybe I'll take a shot at that one, Bill, and you can chime in as well. So
Sure.
transitions from older versions of Lightroom are really easy. The current version of Lightroom will open old catalogs, and it will automatically convert those catalogs to the format that is the current format of catalogs. So it doesn't take long at all. It's probably less than a minute to, even in a large catalog, to import that catalog to the current version of Lightroom and make that catalog current to the current version of Lightroom. The difference between the different subscription versions of Lightroom, one is called Lightroom, the other is called Lightroom Classic. Bill and I have focused today on Lightroom Classic. That's the one that you're seeing here. That's the one that lets you store your photos wherever you choose, on whatever hard drives you like. If you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner of Bill's screen, in those words library, develop, etc., there is a cloud on the far right. And that's to allow Lightroom to synchronize with other copies of Lightroom that you have. And that happens through Adobe's cloud. If you're using Lightroom, not the classic version, but if you're using Lightroom, the cloud version, all of your photographs are stored on the cloud. And that allows you to get them onto your iPad and so forth. The way to move, if you want to move from that cloud version to Lightroom Classic, is go into Lightroom, make sure the cloud is turned on and it is up to date, and then go into Lightroom Classic, the one that Bill's showing here, and click on that cloud and start the sync process from the cloud. And it will bring in the photographs that you had on the cloud. It will bring them into this catalog and make copies for you that are local. Once it's done doing that, and that could take hours, by the way, once it's done doing that, you turn off synchronization on the cloud in the upper right-hand corner, and now you're simply working on the local copies of your files. So that's how you move from Lightroom to Lightroom Classic. Hope that helps, Dave. Other questions? Anybody? There was this was a dense session, Bill. A lot to learn here, but it's good that everybody got to see that the new version of Lightroom looks a lot like the old version, but they've added a lot of power here in the bar that they changed, where you see the crop tool. That's really the new part of Lightroom, isn't it, Bill?
Yes, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So great. Well, if you have other questions about Lightroom or about Photoshop, one of your benefits of being a member is you get to ask the experts. And Bill is certainly an expert and would, I'm sure, be more than happy to answer your questions. If you go into lhsa.org, our website, there is an Ask the Expert link from the homepage, and you can see, according to topic, whether it's Adobe products or whether it's old cameras or whether it's current cameras or digital or lenses. We've got an expert in all the areas that can help you, and you can send an email to that expert, and we do our best to get back to you within a day or two of your question. So we're happy to help you. I want to thank, and I'd like everybody to help me thank Bill Royce, um, who is a longtime board member, supporter, LHSA cheerleader, enthusiast, Adobe certified instructor. We appreciate Bill's time and expertise, and we really thank him for yet another great webinar that we can share with our members. And we hope, thank you, Bill. Just a Zoom round of applause for you. And we hope that everybody has a happy and healthy holiday season. We'll be back with you after the first of the year with the more of our continuing series of webinars. If you haven't seen all the webinars yet, we have more than 20 now in our library that you can access directly from the LHSA website. If you enjoyed today's webinar and you'd like to see more and you want to help support us, take out your cell phone, text to the number 44321, text the words "give" to LHSA, and any amount helps. We really appreciate it. Even $10 helps us offset our things like our Zoom call bills and other administrative bills that we get. And as a nonprofit, we really appreciate it. So thanks again, everyone. Stay well, stay safe. We'll see you after the first of the year, and keep shooting those amazing photos. Take care, everybody.